How's it going? Fox back again for sound design tutorials. Request again today. This one was by Eric Gregorio. It's another Vintage Culture bass. It's from the track Sometimes. It's with Woo2tech, Vintage Culture and Woo2tech. Sometimes there'll be a link in the description to this sound so you can compare them exactly. I sort of went off on a tangent with this bass again. I do it sometimes. I made the sound pretty easily using basic waveforms, sort of saw waves and square waves like I normally do. Thought I'd try through some of the digital waveforms and try and change it up a bit. So that's what I did. So it's progressed from the sound that the chap sent me. It's a lot more deeper, and I've got another layer that's a bit more resonant. I had to do it in 2 layers. I couldn't get it with just 1 patch. So it's based on the sound the chap sent me, but I think I've probably improved it to my ears. It's a lot deeper, a lot more full, using 2 layers to make the sound. I sent the chap a snippet and he's really happy with it. So yeah, I think I'll just call it a Vintage Culture style bass, like I do on some of them where I've just changed it slightly. But yeah, anywho, this is the sound, both layers and a little drum group together. There you go. Both of these patches will be free to download in the description, the sort of sub layer and the upper layer. Yeah, free to do with whatever you please. This is just the 2 layers together without any drums. This is the top layer. This is taking care of the harder, higher, more harmonically rich part of the sound. This is the main sound. I'll do a tutorial for the second part as well, but we'll just scan over it. This is the bass layer. This one. We'll go over the bass layer quickly. There's nothing to it. It's just a square wave and a saw wave, 1 octave down, no effects whatsoever, no sub layer. All it is a low pass 12 filter with a standard envelope on the filter, envelope 2 again, closing the filter off over time. It's got a bit of resonance on it, help it giving it that sort of well, resonant twang to it. It's quite plain and static without the resonance. With the 2 together again. So yeah, that sort of subby deep house bass layer will be free to download in the description as well, but this is the main patch that we're going to be going over. So yeah, I used a couple of different techniques to get to this sound. One with it is a bit of pulse width modulation being modulated, and one is bend plus, making it sort of a bit higher. A filter again. I've got a delay, an EQ, and some effects and some distortion on this. It's important you get them in this order. I've got a distortion after a delay. Don't normally do that, but it did help make the sound. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and initialize this. So as I say, both oscillator A and B were a digital one, and it was D bussy. I've started sort of trying to learn these, gradually trying to integrate them into some of my sounds so I get used to what they sound like. This turned out really, really well for this. As you can see, it's got sinusoidal qualities and then some sort of saw wavy, squarey edges. All the 3 sort of waveforms that you're going to use when making a deep house bass. So both of these are going to route through the filter, so you want A and B highlighted. Oscillator 1 started on, oh, they're both on no octave actually, so didn't transpose them up or down. The bass layer, see, it's really quite low. I'm on D1, so if you want to make this sound for yourself, you want to do it on D1. I normally make sure the notes are on sort of C2 and above. That's sort of bass territory, so if you're doing it there, then you're going to need to pitch these down an octave. But as I say, we're on C1 to C2, So yeah, both of them on 0 octave I had 2 voices of unison on the first one, detuned down to about 0.2. Solo oscillator A for now. The wavetable position, I pushed it around to about 54. I tend to sort of squarify it off a bit. Pan this ever so slightly to the left, sort of 10 left. Increase the gain to 90%. So we'll bring B in now. We'll do the warp modes in a second. I had 5 voices unison on oscillator B. Detune around about the same, just to help smear them apart from each other a little bit. Pan this one to the right, 10, a tiny little bit more volume than standard, about 77%. So the main amp envelope, which is envelope 1, this controls the master volume. I want a tack of about 6 milliseconds. No sustain, because we're going to create a sort of plucky sound before we use any pluck in regards to modulation on an envelope. 15 milliseconds release, decay at 915. I just slacken the slope off slightly. It's not going to get to the end of that decay stage because of the shortness of the notes in my MIDI clip, but hey ho. Yeah, so sub oscillator, 1 octave down, volume just under full, 90%, and this is going to go direct out, so it's bypassing all the effects and the modulation. So we'll create the envelope now that's going to give us this pluck. I usually use a low pass 24 when I'm creating these sounds all in one patch, but because this was taking part of the higher part of the sound, I wanted a more subtle slope, so I kept it on the low 12. I drove it and made it fatter. Resonance where it was as standard. Starting point for the cutoff was at 6,500 Hz, so letting quite a lot through. Now we're going to use envelope 2 to close this cutoff off over time. So drag it, drop it on the cutoff, and we want to. Well, we'll play with this in a minute to get it exactly where we want it. But the envelope needs to be full sustain, no decay, attack. We do want a decay actually, about half a second. 513 milliseconds is what I had it on. Just gently sort of smooth that curve out. 170 millisecond for release. You don't have to be exact to say. You can play with this curve to get the sort of shape of the sound that you want. And we'll just dial in the amount now till it sort of pulls it back to where we want it. That's pretty much where I have it. That's sounding good to me. So that is it. A simple plucky envelope on a filter, closing the filter off over time. Warp mode for A, I add as pulse width mod. I modulate this with envelope 2 just to flick the pulse width mod round. So drag it, drop it on the PWM. I like to use the same envelope when I'm doing a lot of modulation, about plus 25. And the warp mode for B, it was bend plus. These are pretty much doing the same thing, but rather squishing the pulse width all to one end, we're sort of compressing it in the middle with the bend plus. Very subtle, but it is having an effect. What else did I do? I made it monophonic, as it is a bass patch. That's it, then it's just the effects to. So delay, turn the delay on. This wants to be top of the stack. We don't want too much feedback. It's linked to the BPM 1/4 and 1/2. This is hardly audible, this delay. It's It's just delaying a really higher aspect of the sound. We've got the mix quite low, the feedback quite low as well, so it's just helping carry the notes on slightly. I then used an EQ. This wants to be next in the order. I did a little bit of modulation on this. I want a high pass filter on the right side, Q just below center. Frequency was at 9.5, so it's not really having much effect. It's just attenuating anything that might be getting through really high up. This one was a peaking filter. I had a little bit of boost on the gain, pulled the Q down so it was quite wide. Starting frequency around about 300 Hertz, and that same envelope again, just sort of flicking this sort of peak around, just accentuating between 2, and it wants to be plus 20. You can see that little peak flicking backwards and forwards because this was a mid-ish frequency sort of sound. It's just helping accentuate those parts, going along with the same sort of modulation as the pluck on the filter. So delay, then EQ, then distortion. The distortion diode one is my favourite. You have to be careful with it because it really boosts the gain, so you want to pull the mix down straight away. Drive out at 11%, the EQ I had off. There it is. It doesn't sound like much on its own, it just sounds like a high-ish pluck sound that you could use in other. You could use that in a lot of styles of music, but when you bring into play that bass layer that we did, which is this one, I'll just go through it again quickly. As I say, it's a square 1 octave down, a saw wave 1 octave down. The MIDI notes were played in the same at the same range, so like D1 or whatever it was to D2, and then just a resonant envelope closing the filter off. So that on its own sounds like that. With that higher layer, processing on the channels, I've just got some basic EQ, and I'm moving the higher patch out of the way of the lower patch by having a low pass, a high pass filter set at 139 Hertz. The low one, again, I'm just pulling out anything below 2000 Hertz, so it's taking part of the real lower parts of the sound. I've got a bit of compression on the higher one, and then a glue compressor just joining them both together. So brilliant. Having a separate sub layer is a real neat way of getting the power and the depth of sound that you want, but then you can still have the higher harmonics cutting through. That sound definitely had that. As I say, I've made it a lot deeper than the one in the track. I personally think this is better, but that's just me. I am biased. So this is it with the drums that I made. There you go, a vintage culture style bass with Serum. Yeah, as I say, I'll put the link in the description so you can compare it to the original. It's slightly different, but good enough. Yeah, as always, thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe. Keep the requests coming in. I'm getting loads every day. The more I've got, the happier I am. I'll just sort of sift through and try and do ones that are popular. I know these vintage culture and these Woo2tech are really popular at the minute, so people are going to want to know how to make this sort of bass. That's why I chose it. But yeah, thanks for watching as always. Cheers.